beer is not where it is today without what you did.
I've been actually brewing for 40 years. Well, to me, came over here in 1986. There was nothing. And particularly in the United States. There was no allied industry. There was nothing.
I remember you walking and we sat down, talked about the beers. I was trying to talk to you about being partners. I think we can make this thing worth 10 million or more someday, and it wasn't about the money as much as it was, I think, just creating something unique and special and actually survive. Yeah. And on a handshake, we became partners. Having a beer with Fred is really about getting to people's passion and what makes them tick. Having a beer and having honest, frank, clear conversation that inspires our audience is what it's about. Cheers, Alan.
Cheers.
So, do you remember the first, whether Eddie Stebbins or Richard called you first? You're up in Canada, right? We got Heart Brewing or?
Yeah, I was up at consulting with Heart Brewing up in Ottawa, just outside of Ottawa. And Richard Pfeffer called me up and said, I got somebody down here, who's a friend of mine who might be interested in a brewery and is, maybe worth you flying down, because generally this fellow, follows what he said he's going to do, and pretty quickly. So that's when I hopped on a plane and came down. Richard picked me up and came down to Kennebunkport and met you with him at Allison's.
Yeah, he's still. Yeah. I was just thinking about things popping into our heads, or my head, about the past, and every time lately when I start flashbacking 30 years ago, So I remember January 15th, getting a check and handing you a check. You came over to my house at Willard Beach.
Yep.
And I remember you walking, and we sat down, talked about the beers, and you said, well, what style of beer do you like? And at the time, it was Heineken. Yeah. But anyways, I had been starting to drink Gritty McDuff's beer and a little bit of Gary's. And from there, we talked about the different styles, and you walked out the door. And I said to myself, what did I get myself into? No. But I remember that day vividly. I mean, do you remember... the first brew was Export Ale.
Yes.
You remember our first brewer?
Jack Stripe.
He didn't quite have the work ethic you did, but...
He wouldn't have fitted Peter Austin's discipline.
Yeah, right. Yeah,
I think it's mine.
I'll never forget that summer, how crazy it was. And then Jack announced that he was going back to Connecticut. And then you and I had a few beers and talked about, on a handshake, you said, well, let me use this for training, and I'll brew the beer and oversee it and find a brewer eventually and see what happens. So
yes.
1992, fall of 92.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
I go back, actually it was January 4th, 2022 coming up. I've been actually brewing for 40 years.
40 years.
Not to age myself or anybody else.
What's that, January
4th.
January 4th.
That was my first day at work at Ringler Brewery in Peter Austin.
No kidding.
So I look back then, and in those days, back in the small brewery, the Ringler Brewery, Minter's Yard, with Peter, and then how I ultimately came over here in 1986 to build Gears. And in those days, there was nothing. There was no allied industry, particularly in the United States. There was no allied industry. There was nothing. And there was no internet or Google or cell phones. And so, you did things the old-fashioned way. And, we always got things done. And,
the funny story I remember you telling me is you went down in a 3-piece suit.
To meet Peter Austin. Yeah, that was in December of 1981. Yeah, 3-piece suit. And I arrived at the Bournemouth train station where he was to pick me up. David Welsh had set this up, his partner. And so I'm looking around the station, and I see a couple of people with suits on. So I figured this must be Peter Austin. I'd been to a few interviews before at large breweries, and that's how it always was. And I went up to them and said, excuse me, you're looking for me, Alan Pugsley? He said, no. Oh, okay. So I was told to look for a red Wolseley car. Not that I really knew what a Wolseley was, but so I looked for a red car. I was never a car person. And so I walked around, saw a red car, started walking back towards the station. And this fellow who was older than me, but younger than I am now, so I shouldn't say elderly gentleman, because my goodness, he was 57 then at the time.
Yeah.
And
they ripped Irish bread. He was done.
Oh, this was his hobby. It became his retirement project, just to have a fun little brewery.
Yeah.
but came in a smock and sort of stained pants and so forth, which were actually yeast stains, I guess, yeast stained trousers. Said, we looked at each other and said, Alan Pugsy? He said, yeah, Peter Austin, come on, beer boy, into the car. We've got work to do. So he drove me up 10 miles to the Ringwood and told me all about the brewery he's building in Nigeria, right in the desert, Muffa Brewers, and that his partner, David Welsh, has just opened a brew pub, the Frog and Frigate in Southampton, and there's all sorts of excitement going on. He pulled up into Ringwood, just opposite where the brewery was to be, and he looked at his watch and he said, oh, it's 11 o'clock. Would you like to join me for 11s? 11s in England is basically a cup of coffee, whatever.
Okay.
So we went into the Railway Inn, where he proceeds to order a Carlsberg Special, which is a fairly strong beer.
Oh, nice.
And a Triple Snorter Deluxe, which happens to be a triple whiskey.
Well, that's ironic.
And he says, yeah. And he says, and what would you like, Alan? And there's me, a 22-year-old boy, like, half a lager and lime, please. They had no Ringwood beer in this pub because it's a tight pub. So I was like, and he wasn't drinking Ringwood, so I wasn't like, whatever. And that's what I used to drink, lager with lime.
Yeah.
Because I didn't like the taste of ales and bitters and pale ales at that time. So anyway, we had a beer there, and then he took me over to the brewery. Small little brewery, 10-barrel system extended to 15.
That was the original Ringwood?
That was the original Ringwood in Minter's Yard.
Yeah.
And so looking around, then he says to me, there was some stairs that went up through 5 open top fermenters. And they said, hey, dear boy, he said, could you go up there to FV1? You'll see a thermometer hanging in there. Pull it up and tell me what the temperature is. So here I'm in my 3-piece suit, right there, and the big yeast bed bubbling up the top there. I'd never seen it before, right? From the standpoint of... So I'm bringing this up with the yeast slopping up there. I said, 68 degrees. Oh, perfect. Okay, come on down, dear boy. You always call me dear boy. And introduced me to David Welsh and Nigel Welsh. And so that was that. Went back over to the Railway Inn for lunch with Nigel Welsh, and where I could ask a couple of questions about how it was to work at Ringwood, etc.
Yeah.
And then he came in and said, okay, we got transit train. All right, we got to leave. We got to pick up my wife down in Bournemouth, and then off to the station.
Yeah.
So we went and picked up.
That was a real interview, probably.
It was. He went up and picked. We picked up Zena Austin, and they were quite an eccentric couple, really. They were funny as hell.
Yeah.
And anyways, we stopped at a petrol station so he'd get petrol. I'm sure it's all designed.
Right.
And so she starts asking me a couple of questions on that, so I politely answer and whatever, and then get dropped at the station. Going back on the train in my 3-piece suit, I'm thinking to myself, wow. I've been to Paul's Malting, Ways, Whitbread.
All the big guys.
This was fun.
Right.
This is great. Oh my God. I mean, if it's like, I know in that time, as we were leaving, he said, by the way, he said, if I were to hire you, I'll pay you £5,000 a year or £4,000 a year in a company car. And he said, I don't know what you want, but before I could argue, he said, I would take the company car. So anyway, I went back, and about 2 weeks later, I get a letter offering me the job, and started January 4th, 1982. Yeah. That was my interview. And basically, the whole theory behind it was to see if I liked to have a beer, so he could get on with me, because it was all about we got to work together. And at that time, I didn't really know it was specifically to build and design breweries with him specifically.
Yeah.
More to be a brewer at Ringwood Brewery. Yeah. But that's what I ended up being. And that I was wanting to work hard, didn't matter getting dirty, and would do anything to stay, do what it does, and that was his.
That's amazing.
I had the biochemistry degree, so that the background to understanding brewing was there. But
when the biochemistry degree was at University of Manchester,
yeah,
it's unbelievable that Peter had a Carlsberg
Special was his go-to beer.
That's funny.
Absolutely,
that's funny. He was laughing down at everything, right?
Yeah, really.
And then the funny thing, I remember when he came to America. And he told us at the Great Lost Bear, when he started in brewing, that everything was delivered by horse and carriage.
Yeah.
And that it was brewery pretty much as far as a horse could walk. Then there'd be another in a day, and then there'd be another brewery.
Right.
It's crazy.
Right, yeah. No, beer shouldn't be transported further. The horses could walk in a day.
Right. Yeah. It's just so true now.
Really?
Now we have breweries on top of breweries on top of breweries here.
Yeah, his whole thing was, he particularly had his penchant for South Africa in his later years.
Yeah.
And obviously I was over here at the time, and every time I met with him, he showed me this little design brewery and that we really need to do this out and every little shanty town, everyone else can have his own brewery and all that.
Yeah.
But he was getting older and I was committed here, so I felt sort of badly I could never really follow that through with him. But he always wanted to do that because he figured there could be definitely a small scale brewery, one in every little town,
Little tribe.
Now you look in the United States of America, 8,000 breweries here in Maine, over 150, and in every little town, and every little street, and every village, there's a brewery.
I don't even know all of them. It's crazy, right?
Yeah, so it's pretty much happened in what he thought should happen and can happen.
Yeah, it does. So what's funny too is when he came here, he just fit with the brewers.
Mm-hmm.
It seemed like, and he enjoyed everybody, but it was amazing to see him just kind of.
Well, so, through my time here, we used to send people over, or I'd take people over, or people would go over, and even though he'd retired, he would go to the brewery, Ringo Brewery, and meet them and so forth, upon my request and all that. And he would always say, afterwards, say, how did it go? I said, oh, good. If it was a brewery, that was great. And if it wasn't a brewer, even though he said, oh, nice one, but it's not a brewer, you know, not a brewer.
Not a brewer. I know.
What you say that about you?
And I remember brewing with Richard at Gritty's the first time. You said go down and brew with him, so I did. And leaving that next day, I says, I enjoyed it, but I can't all the time. It's a lot of hard work, man. I'll never forget fast forwarding from then to we were brewing 5 times a day.
Yep.
7 days a week.
Yep.
In the middle of the summer, I walk in the stairs up above here. You're completely soaked in sweat. You got your boots on. You got the shorts on. You looked at me and says, we've never brewed more beer, never made more money. And I've never been so unhappy. And that was at a point where I just said, it gets too crazy, right? Sometimes.
Yeah.
Like I remember going back to Feds and the first few brews in the first summer and when we were going crazy. And then you came on board and, Paul Henry, who's still with us.
Yeah.
So I know he's had worked at Gary's, but I think he's out of Brewing. Let's see if we can talk him back into it. And then we started brewing, and then next we were brewing 5 times a day, 7 days a week at the brewery there. It's just insane.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then we found Portland.
Yeah.
How crazy that was. And then it's just, what are the memories that flash into your head when you think back to this building we're sitting in?
One of the first memories is when you first brought me in here on a, cold, wet January afternoon or whenever it was, and it was all dark in here with flashlights, and it was just filled with trash and stuff and tripping over this, that, and the other, and it's like, can this make a brewery work and so forth? And I remember looking around upstairs, each floor and all that, said, wow, it's actually spaced beautifully. The great columns, the floors are solid. Yeah. And, we did some measurements, brief measurements and so forth. So, this absolutely make a perfect brewery. Yeah, that was one of the first right there. Then obviously putting it in and then the different expansions all the way through and so forth.
Who are the brewers that stick out in your mind other than Paul? I mean, obviously he was...
Brewers historically, as obviously Paul Henry, Jeff Young, then became an IT expert and was done very, very well. And, he had worked at Gritters too, and he came down to Fed Jacks and all that, and
called him out in Arizona. I said, you got to get back here.
Yeah, and, I was somewhat of a mentor to him. One time he sent me a note. I think it was my 50th birthday party in a book, and a note in there, and I never really realized it. And he thanked me so much for turning his life around. And I never really realized that, so that was so nice. Yeah. Mike Haley, obviously, who's now being a federal guy. That was area up. Joe Rank.
Yeah.
Very solid, very focused. Those are probably the 4 that we had.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we trained probably how many brewers do you think about?
Well, we had, when we were doing the 5 brews a day, 7 a week in the height of pumpkin season, we had 20 brewers working for us. So over the course of 20 years, 50, 60, 70 probably here, and then all the other ones in different breweries.
So how many brewers did that spin off when you really look at it? I mean, crazy.
Yeah, no, we've, this, but when the breweries, in Maine, we were solid, right? About 33 breweries a year, every year from about 2000, I guess, probably, right the way through until the laws changed. Remember, you could never charge for a beer in a pub. You could have a tasting room in a brewery. You could never have a tasting room.
Yeah.
It's interesting. When that law changed everything.
Yeah.
Well, by it all, you can, serve somebody a pint in a brewery and charge them full price.
Yeah.
That changed everything. Can you imagine if we'd been able to do that from day one?
Oh, look.
The revenue
Jeez.
extra.
It was insane. We when we gave away beer, we actually put less beer out than we are. We're selling it now. It's just completely bizarre.
But so therefore, I think you can outreach to many brewers in New England and Maine in particular and find one of our brewers there somewhere doing something.
No question.
Maybe Dan Roberts of Maine Beer Company. Or
then Sam Quiglione trained for a week.
Yep.
That's where we went
our first head, and now he's part of Sam Adams.
And the boys at Magic Hat ultimately sold. And I think back to all of those different brewers that have come and gone, and we've kind of evolved. And it's really bizarre. And then I remember we were brewing, and we kept selling and adding more equipment, more tanks, and the more we grew, the less money we had, the tighter money became. I started doing the credit card thing. I had 9 of them going, and you and I are all of a sudden, you're here, I'm on the road, Bruce is out. We hired Bruce. He's out selling, and we had to do something. And lo and behold, Miller Brewing Company.
Yep.
American craft beer. So, and what pops in your head when I say that word? Because it almost feels like that whole thing, it just blurs over, right? For me. And then I started thinking about the things, and I think about the Super Bowl trip we took to Phoenix, and a time that we were buying the brewery back, and we were negotiating and going back and forth, and they had screwed up a calculation, and you had it right, but the other guy thought he had it right. We won't say who in accounting. Mm-hmm. And long story short, I had to call you up and say, Alan, I know you're right. I don't care. At this point, fuck it. We just have to go with it.
Yeah, no, I remember writing the letter till 8 o'clock on a Friday evening with our angry.
So you're not going to win. We're going to lose if you win, so just agree.
So you blamed it to the fellow. Oh, don't worry, he's English. No, they have this sort of thing going on. They have a different way to think. Yeah, but I think on the Miller years, it was interesting. It gave me personally, and all of us, but a taste of what corporate life is like, whether it be in America or England, whatever else.
Think about it. They were owned by Philip Morris, which was at the time one of the biggest companies in the world.
So we obviously had many outings to Milwaukee for presentations and so forth, and suits, etc.
Meetings after meetings.
And meetings. The Super Bowl, of course, was a nice highlight. Right. But I take that aside and say, thank God I'm not part of the corporate world, because I really love doing the smaller scale, being able to dress up like this and not have to be in, you and I both like meetings that end in about 2 minutes, I think.
Right.
Done.
That's why we got a long
conversation and everything else and so forth. But the one thing that I did learn a lot about safety.
Yeah.
That was important at the time, the way we were running.
Colberth and his crew were very...
Yeah.
They were actually...
John Seabrooks. And
John Seabrooks.
Yeah. David Ryder was the head brewer. And they learned a lot from us, which was the interesting thing.
They never even had a domain name.
Yeah.
They came in, what's a domain name? I said, well, Shipyard Inc. You gotta reserve your name.
Yeah.
Really? Okay. They go back to them. Yeah, and they never had internal email.
Yeah.
It's crazy, but...
I remember Dr. David Ryder bringing his team over for a tour one time.
Yeah.
In Milwaukee, and I remember being a fellow Englishman, a nice fellow, but, I wasn't nervous about it, but, a little bit on guard because it was early days. So I started touring to the brew house and so forth, talked about water treatment and what we did and so forth, and he stopped me right there. He turned around to his crew and said, see, I've been talking about this for years. We should be looking at the water. We need to be treating with the water. Alan's absolutely right. Oh.
Okay. Then therefore, I remember we were talking about doing a new beer, and they said, well, that's going to take months. I said, no, Alan can give us a recipe and just tell them what you want. We'll have a recipe in the morning. We'll be all set. And they couldn't believe that you could do a recipe that quick and that easy and nail it.
And on top of that, to prove the point, there was a time when David Welsh was visiting from the Ringwood Brewery.
Yeah.
And he and I went out to Milwaukee to meet with them because it's the Old Thumper and all of that.
Yeah.
And they were had just come up with I can't remember the name of the beer. It was a single hop red ale or something. I don't know what it is. Anyway, so they were very excited about it, and asked Dave and I to go down to the lab and taste this beer. So we went in there. There were 20 people in the room with white lab coats on.
20.
Yeah. No kidding.
Yeah.
And Dave and I sat at the end of this long, big table, and they're all looking. So we taste them there, and so one's being polite. It really didn't taste of too much, to be honest. It was a light product, and it wasn't nasty. It wasn't very. Oh yeah, very good. And they then told us, how they've been working on this product for 18 months, and all of them have been in the lab doing this and that and the other to get to this point. And I remember when we left there, and Dave and I were not anywhere with the Miller people anymore. We looked at each other and said, well, actually, David just started laughing. Said, can you just believe that? I said, oh my God.
18 months.
Good Lord.
Yeah. Well, the funny thing is, too, like, we had Goat Island Light, and I remember some of the guys drinking that going, Jesus, we should package this as one of our light beers over there. But
well, the brilliance of Peter Austin was, having been a brewer for 30 years, he understood how to, his biggest deal always was balancing hops and malt.
Yeah.
And I always said the hops and malt should get married and go walk to the aisle together. And that's how it should be. There should be a beautiful, no matter what the style of beer, whether it be a strong IPA, whether it be a stout, or whether it be a light beer.
Yeah.
It should all be married so it all comes together. It shouldn't be just one or the other. It should come together. And that's what he did. And I said, I learned with him, and then I put some sort of scientific way of doing it together with numbers and alpha acids, etc., which to this day works very well. And it's very different to what other people do. I mean, it always brings together the exact balance, no matter what. So,
well, in this export ale, the first beer we brewed, is still tasting is exact. I remember bringing it up to people in bars in Portland, and before they'd been to the Fed Jacks, and they're like, this is too, it's too high in alcohol. Are people going to get too drunk drinking it? And people were selling pints of beer for $1. And I said, well, if you pay $100 a keg, which was double what everybody else was paying for, even Bass, I think, was less expensive. Bass might have been a little more expensive, or right around the same price. And Gary's was less expensive, but we were able to sell it for $100 because we were able to prove at $3 a pint, you were going to make more if somebody just had 2 beers than if you're drinking 2 domestics.
Right.
And that can still play true, it was kind of bizarre.
Yeah.
So now they're getting $300 for a keg, $400 for a keg, and getting $12 for a beer. It's like insanity, right?
I went somewhere the other day where they had bottles of, actually it was mash tun down on there. I had a burger there after playing cribbage or gritters one night. And, it was the drafts about $8-9. On the back page, there was these bottles of beer, $26, $28. Bottle.
One bottle.
One bottle.
Yeah.
More than a bottle of wine. I mean, but 30 years this coming year for this beer.
Yeah. That'll be fun. There are milestones of me meeting James Coyle, me meeting us doing on November 3rd, 1994, doing the simul old Thumper, which was probably to this day one of our best promotions that we ever did.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
You and I toasted in Kennebunkport, and there were 33 other bars from Connecticut all over.
Davy Welsh in England.
And he was in England, yeah. And then now, you think about his daughter came and worked with us, and other people came and worked, and the friendships that we've developed and kept, and, it's crazy, really, when you think about that. Not many people, one, get a business to last more than 3 years, and 2, stay friends through it.
Yep.
And, and 3, actually look to the future. Right now, what's crazy is we may get, we are going into Russia with the relationship, and we're going to have potentially 1,200 accounts if we get this one account relationship. So it'll be friggin', I still, to this day, when you see somebody drink the beer for the first time and go, wow, that's an amazing beer, it all goes back to what you created, and your ability to, that little brewery is still there 30 years later.
Yeah.
And Lance Brown, had the brick kettle, and it's the most unique Pugsley Peter Austin system. The fact that the bricks didn't fit.
Yeah.
And
Scarlet brick.
Yeah. So, you look back to all the people that brewed there, learned there, and then, you go from there, and still we have these young kids that are coming in. We had this young guy starting, Max Drennan, who did an internship with us last summer and goes into brews for the first time. He wasn't even born just born actually when it wasn't even born when we started.
Yeah.
Which is crazy, right? Think about that. And, my goal is and our goal when we talked about it, another night I remember was walking down right in front of Gritty's, and it's a blizzard. And I was trying to talk to you about being partners. And on a handshake, we became partners. And I said, and we were talking about values. And I remember, I think we can make this thing worth 10 million or more someday, And it wasn't about the money as much as it was, I think, just creating something unique and special and actually survive.
Yeah.
And you said earlier, okay, we didn't have a roadmap. There was no, brewers had to kind of help each other. David, the Garys and what you did there and the people that brewed there and the relationships that led to other brewers, and people stuck together and helped each other,
Yeah.
But when we lost a brewer, we didn't have to go find a brewer to hire. We had to train one.
Right. Exactly.
It doesn't happen as much today.
Yeah. Yeah. Although often the best brewers come from that ground completely. No preconceived ideas.
Cheers. Cheers to Peter Austin.
Absolutely. Without Peter, who knows what would have happened?
No. If you hadn't gone and taken that interview. And so when you think of Peter, what are some of the things that when you think of the things he tried to teach you and then he subtly taught you and would say, what were some of those things?
Yeah, and he was an amazing mentor and a great man. A couple of things that really always stand out to me is that he said in order to have a successful brewery, there are four things that you need to do. Number one is always clean, have a spotless brewery. Number two is purchase the most expensive ingredients possible. Buy the best ingredients possible. Don't go cheap. Buy the best ingredients possible. You don't want inferior. You want best.
Yeah.
Boil the kettle hard, which sterilizes everything, and pray to God. Which is basically what we all do.
We did a lot of that.
Yeah. And then the other thing is, which is a very simple thing, really, if the first beer doesn't taste like a second beer or another beer, you failed.
Yeah. 3 months
Because
later, 6 months.
Ultimately, it's all about sales.
30 years later.
Yeah. So, I like that beer a lot, but also you go, if somebody says that, you just failed. You didn't book them enough. You didn't hook them enough. In today's world, where there's so much variety and everything else, I still believe it rings true because, even though he was a brewer, he was also a very smart man.
Yeah.
And it was all about sales.
Yeah.
Because without sales, there's no brewery. So.
Do you remember the breweries you worked at? I remember I remember the word.
Yeah. So he started brewing in 1945. He was a merchant marine. He got sick with a pneumonia in a lung. He actually lost a lung.
Okay.
So he always, from 43, 4, always had one lung. And so 1945 started brewing. He did a training thing down in Guildford, England. She's down south, Friary Brewery. That's where he did his apprenticeship. And then he went. One of the reasons he went into brewing, I may add, is that his father worked for a Pontifex, which was a brewery fabricating company.
Oh, no kidding.
Yeah.
Oh, geez.
And he had a book, and I don't know what happened to the book, which is the old Pontifex book, and it was actually a really lovely book with all pictures and everything of stuff he made. A lot of it was the wooden vats and so forth, and their own metal, stainless, and so that. And his father, his uncle, was head brewer at a brewery in Christchurch, which is 10 miles south of Ringwood.
Oh, no kidding.
Yeah. So, so that was in his blood a little bit. So he took his apprenticeship down in Guildford, spent a small time at Morrell's Brewery, lovely little brewery in Oxford, and then ended up going to Hull Brewery, I believe it was in 1947. And he was there till 77. He was there 30 years and became head brewer within, 5 or 10 years of being there.
Hull Brewery. Yeah.
I remember, and one of the things I remember there is his original boss at Hull Brewery was a fellow called Jeffrey Hughes. He told me. And he was in there one day as his assistant brewer, I guess, at the time. And he was in the office, and all of a sudden there was a knock on the door. And there's these couple of lads, if you like, bringing up samples of beer for a refractometry test, which means measuring sugar and so forth.
Yeah.
So he brought him in. Oh, thank you very much. Boom. And Peter said, Jeffrey, why are we doing that? You know, we have these saccharometers downstairs, which read the sugar and all that stuff. There's really no need to do this as well, right? He said, oh, no, Peter, of course there isn't, but it keeps the men honest, you know, it keeps the men honest. In other words, this is what we're doing.
Yeah,
You'll keep doing it. And if you don't come here, you're not doing something. So therefore, I know when you come here, I know you're doing the job.
Exactly.
You know, quite a thing.
Exactly.
So, yeah, he was there until 1975. Reason he left was they got bought out by Northern Dairies, I think they called it, and became known as North Country Brewers.
Yeah.
And he became disillusioned, disenchanted with the new ownership and everything else, and so retired.
At 57, he retired.
Yeah.
Think about that.
Yeah.
I mean, we're 61, you're 62.
62, yeah.
62. I'm not ready to retire. I mean, and you're still going with doing what you're doing.
So that was good. And then there was one time when I was working with Ringwood, I had the Ringwood truck. I had to go to a...
was it a pickup truck or was it?
No, it was a little van with a open back, because I had to pick up a couple of heat exchangers up at Central Bottling for one of the, I think for the Mopper Brewery in Nigeria. He was doing it.
Nigeria?
Yeah, and then I had to go pick up somebody else from somewhere else. And then he felt that we needed a change of yeast. And so the original Ringwood yeast,
Yeah.
that of course is responsible for many of the beers here and the Gears and many of the other brewers that I brought over, is actually a Yorkshire yeast from the whole breweries, which was originally shared with Halifax. Well, no, they said you're on Mr. Rustin. If you want to brew it, when you do it,
No
call
problem.
them up, so no problem at all.
That's it.
So when I went up there to get the recharge yeast this particular year, I don't know, 1984, say, I pulled into the yard there. I'd never been there before. And they saw the Ringwood Brewery truck. It was bright red it was a nice logo truck. And there was fellas out in the yard there, the men those people were pulling in the yard.
Men.
And I got out of the truck and I could hear them whisper, oh, that's Mr. Rustin's brewery. That's Mr. Rustin's.
Oh, they knew.
Mr. Rustin's brewery. And they came up to me, you work for Mr. Rustin?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Alan Pubs did it. Oh, we love Mr. Rustin, though.
Oh, yeah.
So even...
He's respected.
Yeah. So it really told me, well, I didn't need to be told anymore, but I still to this very day,
Somebody else.
still warm and good about. Probably the most extraordinary man I've ever met.
Yeah. One of the funny stories, not funny, but, Monty Python and the Holy Grail in my lifetime was one of the funniest movies. And it just took America by storm. And you tell the story about how one of the first consulting jobs Peter got was through
That's what
happenstance.
I see what inspired him to do the Ringwood Brewery.
Yeah.
Because when he retired, he just, he liked pubs, like I like pubs, like you like pubs, and English pubs are beautiful, of course, in their own right, a different sort of beast. And he just wanted to sort of tootle around parts of the country he hadn't seen and stop off here and there and just enjoy himself, have a beer there and there, talk to publicans and whatever. So you like, become, the sort of people you equate to. And so he was, one time he was up in the Herefordshire border in this pub, minding his own business, having his probably Carlsberg special or and he overheard these three fellows down there. Overheard them talking about, they would love to build a little brewery and have their own beer and wouldn't it be fun, whatever. So he couldn't help himself, so he turned around and said, "Excuse me, I'm sorry to interrupt, but my name's Peter Austin, and I used to be a brewer. I'm a retired brewer. I just couldn't help hearing what you were talking about."
Right.
And they introduced themselves, and it was Terry Jones, John Cleese, and Terry Gillen, Monty Python.
Unbelievable.
And from there, they carried on dialogue and so forth, and they ended up consulting and building their brewery, Penrose Court.
I remember the letter you had on the wall.
Yeah, I have the original letter in my office. And basically, Terry Jones thanking Peter for a wonderful time, and we must have the most beautiful brewery in England and certainly the best beer. Signed, Terry Jones. Brilliant. And he just passed away about...
I didn't know that.
18 months ago. Actually, on my website, I have a picture of him with a beer, I think, on his head.
Nice.
Terry Jones after his brewery, tribute to Terry Jones.
Bring out the dead. No.
So I often say, if I ever wrote a book, it would be from Monty Python to all this great beer or something like that.
You need to write a book. You need to write a book. In fact, we should just have a few beers and talk about it.
Yeah, well, that's...
From my perspective, you are the man that really, and it was obviously Peter's, love and passion for beer and brewing that brought you to America. And I always tell people, And I like Jim Cook. I think he's an amazing guy. He's done an amazing job, and he's had a major impact. But his first system was a Peter Austin system.
Mm-hmm.
And I always tell people, well, he might disagree. Maybe there's another part of that story, but obviously it didn't work out where he wanted to brew his own beer initially, and he did Peter Austin and then shifted from there. And you look at the impact that you've had, Peter Austin has had, Jim Cook's had, and then others that have followed, Anchor Steam and others. But really, that's the birth of American brewing.
Yes.
Without that law changed, and without people like you coming to America and making it happen, and then also, Fritz Maytag rejuvenating Anchor Steam, and that would not have led to, Gary's and Shipyard and many other beers. But at the end of the day, I get a little surreal when people look at me and go, "Yeah, thank you very much for being a pioneer." Well, you're the pioneer and really Peter's passion for brewing and love of it was brought down, so it's pretty crazy because when you think of all the breweries that Peter, I'll never forget. Okay, I was walking by your office, you're talking about your, and you come out and you go, "We're going to send a brewery to Russia." I said, "What's the story?" Peter's got something going. We're going to do this brewery. Do you mind if it was Mike Hall?
Yeah.
Mike Hall. Do you mind if we send him to Russia? I said, "Definitely send him to Russia." Yeah. And anyways, Mike's a good guy. But, so long story short, he said, everything got sent and everything's going on. You're consulting on it. Well, we lost the brewery. What do you mean you lost the brewery? Well, we can't find the brewery. So nobody can tell us where the brewery is. So we're not sure where Mike's going to go. Maybe he was going to go.
It was disappeared for a
What's
year.
your version of that story? Because that.
Well, we shipped it off. We did our job. They were responsible. There was a middleman in Finland, Hans Carlson, who was the middleman, and actually was the man we dealt with. Yeah, sold the brewery to, actually. Yeah, and he was responsible for the shipping of that. And he was going to go to a place called Dudinka. And then after that, we were going to. And then it became to the point of, we'd communicate with him, and my fax machine at my old house there would start going off at 2 a.m, and it would be Hans Carlson sending me, when we were building a brewery, 20,000 sheets of this, that, and the others. And oh my God, there's that time when there was paper, that soft paper that used to come in on ream and all that. Oh my goodness. So I had to get up at 2:30 in the morning or 2 a.m. and ended up reading this stuff. Okay. I had to talk to Carol England. Who was my secretary there, and Non-Ferris. And all
right, Non-Ferris guys. Yeah.
Oh my goodness. But anyway, they lost it. And then a year or so later, all of a sudden we get a communication, and Carol gets communication from Hans Carlson. It's been found. It's now going to Norilsk in Siberia.
Siberia. And we sent Mike to Siberia.
So I it's a time that we had just done the deal with Miller.
Yeah.
I couldn't leave.
Yeah.
And Michael was working first at the time, so he had to be here. But I couldn't just send Michael. So that's when I asked Peter. Now you got to go 95. And I asked him if
I'd like to. Peter, you sold it, and Peter went for it.
Yeah. So it was through Peter Austin, because I took over Peter Austin Powell's contract as he retired.
Yeah.
And then we gave him commissions, and he would be influential, and also he would go look at the equipment when it was being made before I came over and everything. Right. So so it was all there. But he was retired. He was I
wonder if that brewery's still going.
It was up until about 2 or 3 years ago. I did hear something that maybe it had not, or it may have moved somewhere else. I'm not sure. So who knows? But I do remember the one story I remember out of that thing was how cold it was.
Yeah,
I had some great photos of Peter over there too, all dressed up in mini layers.
Oh no, for it.
And again, so it was 1995. So he died. He actually died January 1st, 2014. So it'll be 8 years, January 1st.
Wow.
He was 92 years old then. So, but anyway, one story I remember is that when they went to do the first brew, and they were boiling the kettle, and it was a kettle that had the copper dome like we had here, which was separated from the vessel. So you just put it on top and the copper dome and that, and the copper dome side left off. The steam that was coming out as the kettle was boiling. No, the steam froze. How cold it was outside. The steam
froze.
It was freezing from the air coming there. So they had to end up putting a heat tracer on the whole thing to keep it
down.
Keep it from freezing. Steam freezing.
That's crazy.
Think about how cold that is.
Good thing you didn't go. You're too thin. You'll be frozen to death.
No, it was yeah.
And then we put the. I don't know if Peter ever came to Orlando when we put the brewery in Orlando.
No, he didn't. David Welsh did, and the North Ferris boys did it.
Yeah. So that was a crazy time. That was but we committed to do that before we did the deal with Miller, and then they helped finance it, thank God, because we ended up overspending double with
the airports were many more challenges. And can you imagine if it was post 2000, 9/11, post 9/11?
So we did accomplish a few things along the way. We had the only brewery in the world, functioning brewery in the world, in an airport, which is crazy. We had to do a bomb-proof room. Remember that cost us like $60,000 or
for the malt mill.
Right.
Yeah,
it's crazy. That was
trucks coming in underneath with malt supplies and everything else. Can you imagine that to this day?
Never
happened. That was quite something. Yeah. Ron Rake was the brewer, did a very good job.
Yeah. And then Peter, the last time he was in America, what year was that, you think?
It was actually at the Craft Brewers Conference. That was when Erica was born, my daughter, 1996. In fact, we have a great photo of all of us at a Pugsley Brewing Project's booth with Peter, you, David Geary, myself, Leslie, my wife, Erica's a baby, a Fladvig old baby. Yeah, we're in the thing there, and the non-ferrous guys, Paul Henry, and some other future contract people. And
crazy.
That was the last time because he had some bit of a medical issue that he was worried about and decided he wasn't really going to travel around there. So even though he lived to be, as I say, till 2014, after many years after that. But
amazing, really. Did he have any kids?
Yeah, well, his first marriage, he had, so from his first marriage, so I had 2 boys and a girl. Jay.
Any of them brew, you think?
No. Jeremy and his other son have a company, Austin McLean in Boston, big engineering company.
In Boston?
No, did I say Boston? I'm sorry, Bournemouth.
Bournemouth.
And in England, just
the engineers.
Yeah. And but didn't really have interest in Jane. She worked actually for the the Ringwood pub in Ringwood and that. But I think she lives in France now. So but nobody really had the. So I became sort of his surrogate son, and became my surrogate father. And my father hated beer, and my mother hated beer, and my sisters hate beer. So nobody likes my cooking. And my wife gave up beer. So
is she really?
Oh yeah, she was wine and all that stuff. So there's not anybody in my family who really likes beer.
Oh my God. So that's so funny because everybody's. I think people will come back to beer, but now with this seltzer and all the other stuff we're doing, and I never really understood distilling. And then when we distilled Pumpkinhead into beer, finding out that, Pumpkinhead into whiskey. We're learning a lot about whiskey and the relationship, and it all goes back to the farmers, right?
Yeah.
All comes from the fields and ends up in it really is farm to table when you think about it. Yeah. And I got lucky enough through you to meet, Chris Malting and William
Chris.
And what a character. Where in the world is he now? Forget the times we had with him. Oh my God.
Yeah, no, I think he's in Roatan right now. They have a house and at Roatan where they live, and they travel a lot. And he's retired, sold his business, basically quit drinking.
Did he?
Yeah.
He needed to. I went
doing well.
I went to the Chris malting facility. Richard Westwood set it up. I went with Judy, and I got to row the malts up in the old area. I don't exactly know what they call that, but where they rake the malt and
molding floors.
And then recently, a few years, I think it's 3 years ago, I went up to the county and we were the Buck boys up there.
Yeah.
And I remember when we had malt spike in price.
Yeah.
And we're like, and I said, Alan, we got to do this in America. This is ridiculous. It's the same climate, And at the time we called William, let's get this going. He said, never happened, never will work. And now I look at it, and I was standing in the barley fields in the county and go, wow, this is special. It's truly, when you can think about this from there to the bottle, it's like,
It's amazing how the farmers and the agricultural world took a long time, but embraced the whole industry, and figured out ways to grow the barley and hops and so forth in climates that you would never really have thought would work.
Yeah. So I think back to Pumpkinhead and Ken Hendrickson doing the logo and we're selling it down at Federal Jacks and Kennebunkport Brewing. Mike Haley helped brew it. And, we're going back and forth, and we're up at my conference table in there, and I'm saying to Bruce, you and Dave Dubois, and Dave goes, I don't think it's a good idea. I don't think it'll sell. You didn't think it would sell. Bruce, well, you didn't want it to sell. I think you...
Hey, I made it with more pestle and all that stuff. You know how that started, right? But it was back in Federal Jacks there.
Yeah.
And the very, first year we did the summer ale, it was 93.
Yeah.
And we had 2 kegs left over. It was into September, so I was getting a little late for the summer.
Yeah.
So I remember going up to the kitchen. Chris Gordon was, I think, our chef at the time, and saying, and I think I talked to you and said, I'll make a pumpkin something or other.
Something or other. Okay. Something these idiots will...
So I went up, what's in a pumpkin pie? Okay, so he gave me nutmeg and cinnamon and allspice and whatever else. I don't remember the mortar and pestle, grind it all up and that, pouring some pints off and trying to dose it off until finally it came... taking upstairs, say, what does everybody think of this? So that's pretty good right there. Yeah. So remember we doctored the 2 kegs of summer with that dosing of those materials, and they sold out in like a night and a half or something.
Yeah, boom. And now it saved us this year. We sold 40,000 barrels. Yeah. 39.6.
Amazing.
Cheers to that. Yeah, we're looking.
Thanks for those, thank goodness for those 2 leftover kegs of summer ale.
No, I appreciate our relationship.
Yep, absolutely.
Without it, many lives would. If you can have that happen in the family business and keep it going, and it's nice to see these younger kids coming up, and it's truly a bizarre, interesting time. But it all starts somewhere and then leads somewhere, and obviously we didn't invent beer, but we did invent the it evolved, right? And I feel, you have to give some credit to Buffalo Bill.
Yeah, do it.
I do, anyways. You do as well. I was doing Erica. He was on the West Coast there, and some of the other guys that have been around. And I look at like Sea Dog and what happened with Sea Dog and the buying of the brand, but Peter Camplin and the family. And when I say the word Peter Camplin, what comes into your head?
Sea Dog.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah,
remember him coming down to Federal Jacks, having lunch with me out in the restaurant there that was separate at that time, and thinking about doing something, and then the whole Sea Dog brand we ended up taking over and buying from them. So
every time I think of Peter, I think of, I met him and the opening that he had in Camden with the handcrafted, he had the little truck, that was unbelievable.
Yeah. That was the dog.
It was, but he was he was so creative with wood and the craft. Did amazing what he did with the pubs and the
great locations.
Yeah. The funny thing was I got fired by Miller, which
for being entrepreneurial.
Yeah. And got paid 100 cents on the dollar for my contract, and turned around and said, well, 2 things. One, Alan, obviously Alan will be here, and I'm not leaving the building.
Mm-hmm.
What do you remember about those days?
They were interesting days, and it was towards also the end of the time. Miller was starting to have some issues and problems, and Miller Lite, which had been the king of light, was suddenly overtaken by Bud Light.
Yeah,
and I remember that the top brass there were summoned to craft offices there. Jeff McDonough, I think his name was, a chairman or whatever, and of Miller and CEO, whatever, and others. And when they returned to the headquarters, their bags had been packed and they were waiting outside for them, and they were fired. And that somebody else took over. And that moment on, our direct links changed. American Craft Specialty went away, which is our direct link.
Virgil Colbert was the head guy at that point. The accountant, what was the accountant's name? Princess Berutha.
Oh, yeah.
She was definitely...
and then David Goulet became our person.
David Goulet, yeah.
And he listened to some of our in-house woes that we had, certain Miller people. And that was really the beginning of the end of the Miller deal, but also the beginning of the opportunity for us to buy it back. So, we learned a lot. We got a lot.
Yeah.
We didn't get what they promised. Like, I remember we closed on the deal that I think it was Scott Barnum, American Express. When you sign with Miller, the taps will pour.
Yeah.
Well, they actually really did.
They stopped.
Because, remember, they thought they knew their network of distributors. And like Chicago.
Same zone.
So we went in Chicago. They signed up the Sam Adams brand.
Right.
And all the third. Our 10 trucks to Chicago just stood somewhere else.
We sold more beer than our own.
With MDI.
Yeah.
And that was, then you realize that the Miller Brewing Company at that stage did not understand, or did not control at least.
They don't control the distribution.
Yeah. Well,
This is the unique thing, the U.S. versus the U.K. as far as distribution. The distributors in the U.K. own the breweries. The brewers own the distributorships, and not in America, which is a whole different game, which is kind of bizarre.
Yeah.
Remember doing the beer dinner in Chicago with like 600 people?
Yep.
It is crazy.
Yeah.
And how about Dick? Remember when they wanted us to stand up on stage when they did that big campaign of "You Don't Know Dick," and it was Miller's new campaign.
Oh,
they wanted
a Miller comfort.
Both you and I are looking at each other. We took off.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. Yeah.
We're not going up there. They wanted us to go up there with no clothes on and put the big sign over our center. I was like, no way, we're not doing that. You look at me like, am I really going to do this? I know. We're going to that pool. But you need to go to them. But it's kind of funny. And then I remember being in Atlanta. We're at the Brewers Conference, and I'm walking through the Ted Turner, I'm walking through the restaurants there, and I go by this pub restaurant, and there's screaming in the back. I'm like, what the hell is that? It sounds like something's going on. It's like 9:30 in the morning, 10 o'clock, whatever. And I'm hearing this. So I look back, there's like 9 guys back there yelling, rah, rah, rah. And I'm like, geez, I want to go back to have a beer. So I walk in there, and there you are with like 9 other guys, fuck, screaming. So I never saw you yell, never saw you swear, never saw.
And just United apply.
Yeah. Oh, this is great.
I was looking at this bright beer right here. Can I tell you one of the pet peeves I have in the world right now is expanded beer? Cloudy beer.
Cloudy beer.
I hate really over cloudy beer. And, Mike Dixon, who's the bar manager there at Great Lost Bear, they're obviously big.
And we don't have export on by draft anymore there.
But he had a word saying it, he considered that hazy beer is lazy beer.
Exactly.
And it really irritates me totally. If you want to have a New England style IPA, that only became cloudy because of a hiccup at the brewery in Vermont that somehow or other came up with this whole thing. And one of the big changes I see in the game today is the ability to maximize social media.
Fake it to make it.
Fake it to make it, and social media.
Yeah.
That suddenly drives crowds. Like lemmings, they all run to the brewers with stuff. It's extraordinary to me.
People can enjoy lactobacillus.
Yeah, well, if you like,
that's another angle.
Like the flavor, yeah. If you like the flavor, you like the flavor. But lactobacillus and Peter Cockeye have been my enemy from day one. I will continue to be so.
No, I agree. Honestly,
remember the day when we were? I mean, we would have people. The distributor would call us up.
Yeah, there's a little hazy.
There's a slight haze in the beer.
Yeah,
it must be off.
Yeah, chill.
I remember Paul and I going
chill
haze. Yeah. So maybe, it was too cold at one point, or maybe the filter had crept above the.
They wanted the beer cold, right? So that didn't.
Yeah, so you had to bring. So we always filtered at 28 Fahrenheit to make sure the chill haze came out, so we could filter it out. So when the beer was cold, but maybe sometimes as it run on the filter or whatever else, somebody notice and it creeps up a little bit, and so you might get a chill haze on occasion. And it was like the end of the world.
Yeah.
End of the world.
Yeah.
And now we look at it and say,
doesn't matter.
It's extraordinary to me. And it really, where it's a wonderful, wonderful thing that there's expansion of breweries. I do also believe in that whole expansion of breweries. The quality aspect of beer has gone downhill substantially.
No, and also the love of beer. I think people, I hope that younger guys, the ones I think that have a passion for it and that have sustainability will be around.
Yep.
and the ones that don't won't, because at the end of the day, you got to love what you do. You know, like you're lying about, it wasn't a line. It was what you said. I've never worked a day in my life.
Yeah.
And my favorite beer is the one in my hand.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly what it is.
It's like,
Yeah.
no, because at the end of the day, I mean, I don't, you never know what you're going to do in life. And I think back to your childhood, you say, well, I'm going to go to college, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that. And we got lucky enough to meet each other and do this. And I truly appreciate all you did for me. And
That's been a great relationship.
it's crazy how it's evolved.
Yeah.
And I say to some people, I said, wait till they get married and have kids and see how hard they're working, how much passion they have for the business. They got to be home at 7 o'clock at night or 6 o'clock at night. When we started, we could work all night, right?
Yeah.
Remember? But we've been lucky enough to have sustained it. I think back to Pete's Wicked Ale and, all the different breweries that have come and gone, Portland Lager to all these different beers. And then now we're doing Portland Lager, Shipyard's Portland Lager. And it's kind of crazy. I look at it and just have flashbacks to all the different
things
we had.
It's interesting how, things come and go, ebb and flow.
Yeah.
It's, so with Federal Jacks, it was a situation of when I came down here and Fred and I had a informal partnership back in September of 92. That back in those days, Kennebunkport became a ghost town. So we couldn't sustain the production. We couldn't sustain the brewery, really, with the people who would come into the pub. So we had to start selling beer outside. So we did. We delivered beer in our cars, Fred and his S10 Blazer, me and my Thunderbird, delivering up to $3 Doers and the Great Lost Bear and Silver Street Tavern and others. And that's what we did. 15.5 gallon kegs, because at that time the slim 5.2 gallon keg didn't exist. So but the export ale was the primary beer. Initially we sold out, and it was the first Maine made beer available for sale outside of a Gritty's in their own pub since Geary's. That I put it in 1986, of course. Geary's Pale Ale. And so people are excited about it. They love the beer. So we started getting traction on it. And all of a sudden, more and more pubs wanted to have the beer on tap. And then it became a thing that, all right, well, some of the liquor stores wanted, RSVP wanted to have it, but we didn't have any package. So we decided to, initially we did the 5-liter cans. And that only had so much life to it. So we ended up doing 22-ounce bottles. And filling them by hand on a hand filler. And the thing is, we weren't very smart at that time because we got the labels and everything else, but the labels weren't self-adhesive. And so we sat there at the back of the table. I remember at the time it was my soon-to-be wife, Leslie. At that time, she was an employee, but we later got married, and Paul Hendry and others, and we'd sit around this table and just with pots of water and these labels, we had to write the labels in the back and put them on. That was the first ever bottles of Shipyard Ale and Shipyard Export Ale or any beer, and then we started selling those out. So then that traction started to happen. So we bought a Mahim machine, which is the only small scale, tiny bottling machine you could buy. That a bit more automated, and we started doing them on the Mahim machine. So then I just built a brewery in Chambersburg a year or so before that, and Arrowhead Brewing, Red Feather. And Fred had mentioned, well, do you think that'd be interesting contract brewing some 12-ounce bottles of export? So they were, and they did, and we did. So that's how we started getting 12-ounce. And at that point in time, we appointed Nappy distributors because the 12-ounce distribution was going to be more tricky. And it was a time that we were brewing down there. So things really grew in 93. And so it got to the point, in late 1993, when Fred and I were chatting down at Federal Jack, sitting outside or wherever. And I said, Fred, we can't do anymore. We literally cannot do anymore. We are brewing it 12 times a week here in this little brewery. And that brewery is only set up to do twice a day max, and that was 24 hours a day because the way it wasn't meant to do that in the first place. for draft, and that's 22 ounce. And then Red Arrowhead Brewing was doing some 12 ounce. And I said, I don't know. The sales seem to be going whatever. I said, really, you've either got to stop it here and be done and be happy with what you got right now, or we've got to build a real brewery. And by a real brewery, I meant a larger brewery. And that's when Fred put his real estate hat on and went looking and found the building we're sitting in today here at 86 Newbury Street in Portland, Maine, and built the brewery. So that's how it came to be. And we started the brewery, opened it up, 50-barrel brewing system. We had the ability to do 300 barrels a week. We had 6 50-barrel fermenters, bottling line and so forth. We were using about probably 20,000 square feet of the building at the time. We just opened up just doing export ale, which would be unheard of today, of course. And we kept brewing and packaging, and the beer is building up. Meanwhile, Fred had appointed, I think, federal distributors up north and this and that, and was going to New Hampshire and Massachusetts and appointed distributors and so forth, and hiring salespeople. All those things were actually unheard of back then in the beer industry. Basically, the brewer went out and the owner went out, and that's how you did it. Well, Fred said, well, no, we're hiring salespeople in all these markets. We're going to go do it. So the beer is building out. We have almost nowhere to put beer anymore. I said, Fred, he said, no, just keep brewing. I said, I can't just keep brewing. I got to get rid of the beer. So then all of a sudden the beer started to move. And before you knew it, we didn't have enough beer. And that was how it all came to be. And him and Fred and the sales team did a great job. And Bruce Forsley, his cousin, and then we contract with Old Thumper and Ringwood and licensed November 3rd of 1994. And
Cheers, my friend.
Cheers.
It was great. Well, no, honestly, I look at what's happening in America, our good fortune, our challenges, our opportunities, and you and Peter Austin and others, no question, but you especially, beer is not where it is today without what you did. That's the bottom line. Now, everybody can say and do different things in life. You just did it. And you weren't a guy that said, hey, I did, and you didn't have necessarily the desire to be the front and the exposure and the accolades and all the extra things. But in reality, without Peter Austin, without Alan Pugsley, American beer is not where it is today, as quick as it has been. I don't care what anybody says.
And ultimately, I'm a disciple to Peter Austin in this.
Exactly. God bless him.
God bless him.
It was that praying that paid off.
Yeah, really.